choose who you want to private message, and that will just be directly to that person. Okay. So I am happy to introduce our panelists here. So we have 3 panelists this morning, and I will unshare my screen in a second so they can introduce themselves. But just to let you know, my name is Jenna. I am your facilitator this morning. I am your NAFSA Region 5 IEL KC representative. Let me unshare here. All right, Amy, do you want to start?
Good morning, everybody. It's nice to see so many familiar faces and new faces. My name is Amy Conger. I'm the Associate Vice Provost and Director of Global Engagement at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor.
Jenna, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jenna Graff. I am the Director of the Office of International Education at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh.
And Kemi?
Good morning, everyone. Happy Thursday. My name is Kemi Onajole. I am the Director of the International Center at Illinois Tech, or Illinois Institute of Technology here in Chicago. Happy to see all of you and some folks I haven't seen in a while, so it's great to be here.
All right, well, welcome to the 3 of you, and welcome again, everyone here. We're going to get started with a poll. So you will see a question pop up on your screen in just a second here. We'll give you a minute to answer, and then we'll share the responses here just to get us rolling. We'll give it just a few more seconds here for everyone to respond. I'm going to end it in just a second here. All right, perfect. So it looks like, let me share the results here, that for most of us, everything went pretty well, all things considered, and there are some challenging parts as well. So part of what we're going to talk today with our panelists is how communication really occurred on different campuses and what that kind of looked like across the board. So let's get started here. So with our first question, Jenna, so how would you characterize the nature of campus communications during spring 2020?
All right, so during spring 2020, let me give you a little bit of context here for my response so that you understand how communications was set up and where that protocol came from. So the state of Wisconsin has a pandemic plan, as does the city of Oshkosh and UW-Oshkosh. But our pandemic plans were set up for influenza. We did a tabletop exercise in 2017, and then we were hit with the norovirus in our residence halls in early 2018. So we felt like we were on the right path. We had centralized pandemic planning along with other risk management activities under our university police. But then in early January of this year, when we realized that there was potential for a challenge with our inbound students, our emergency operations committee invited me to be a member of the team. And that's really why I have some familiarity with campus level communications as well as communications coming out of our program. So by mid-spring, we had transitioned to a recovery task force for spring with subcommittees that were responsible for and also regularly reporting in writing and through meetings on our progress. So this really affected our communication to the public and to our students as well. And then by early summer, we had transitioned to our Titans Return Task Force. So communications with students and parents, that was all handled centrally. Anything that was for the entire student body was vetted and posted on our website by our University Marketing and Communications team, UMC for short. And that particular team happens to be in a physical office that is right next door to mine. So that they know we exist, they see us every day, we're popping in and out of each other's offices. So it made it pretty easy for me to get access to them, and for them to consult with me on messaging, just to make sure that students in F&J status and any prospective study abroad or away students wouldn't be confused or scared, and for our inbound students so that they wouldn't inadvertently end up deemed out of status by some sort of message that came out from campus before we got guidance from the federal government, especially in relation to online coursework. Any communication that was specific just to our audiences, so our outbound and our inbound students, that was handled directly by my office. I wrote the communications, or my staff did, and between the staff and I, we crafted basically responses to what we called our frequently asked questions. And those were all posted publicly on the UW-Oshkosh coronavirus response website. And any communications that went out then referred back to those FAQs. And that seemed to work really well, having that standard operating procedure in place well before the pandemic hit. What I struggled with, though, was really insufficient messaging and delays in those messages, as the situation was changing so quickly that the messages needed to change, but the students and the parents were waiting for us. We also had a lot of communication with our partners abroad. However, our communication to our inbound partners was largely reactive, as was the communication from our inbound partners back to us. Immediate communication or frequent communication, just updating them on the situation or letting them know that the situation hadn't changed, would have been a better route to take, but wasn't the way we went. With our outbound partners, we were in constant communication, practically 24 hours a day, as we tried to work through canceling or rescheduling programs. So I really struggled with communication that was largely student focused, with copies to our inbound partners rather than copying or sending communication out to inbound partners first, so that they would have a heads up before their students got bad news.
Great, thank you. So to hear a little bit on the other side, Amy, how did you approach communications with your international partners during spring 2020?
That's a big question. Also to give a little context about our campus, the University of Michigan, we're quite large. We have 19 schools and colleges, about 48,000 students, and we had several thousand students abroad when COVID became a serious concern. I see several University of Michigan colleagues on this Zoom call. So I want to be clear that our professionals in our education abroad offices within those schools and colleges did much of the heavy lifting in terms of communicating with partners. But I can share some of the observations based on what I was involved with. I would say, perhaps, maybe I'll talk about the most challenging area of communications, and that was with our bilateral exchange partners. These are, in many cases, longstanding partnerships where we've been moving students back and forth for decades. And the challenge was, we, as a U.S. institution, we were asking for very, rapid changes and special accommodations for our students. In many cases, special treatment that was not yet available to our partners' students. So at our university, we were starting to pull students home and ask them to leave their study abroad programs before our own campus went remote. So it was somewhat uncomfortable, right? We were asking our students to leave. We were asking these partners to shift to remote instruction, make special accommodations about final exams, which we know in many cultures, those final exams are quite structured, and it's a big ask to make accommodations. So we tried to practice as much humility and gratefulness as we could, but I also, more than ever, I found myself doing a lot of explaining about US culture, about our aversion to risk, the high level of, let's call it, engagement from our parents, families, and guardians of our students. And this was a time more than ever where I felt like I was doing a lot of apologizing. I'm hopeful, and I saw that humility among my University of Michigan colleagues, and I'm hopeful that that has served us well. We did a lot of careful follow-up, a lot of thanks. That became much easier once our own campus went remote and we were able to follow through on our promise that their students could return home and still complete their coursework and take their exams. But I'm looking in the chat box and I see somebody said, we have that you have partners that have not responded since COVID. I think we've been pretty lucky in that space, probably due to our leading with apology and trying to do a lot of explaining, but it has certainly strained certain partnerships, to be sure.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Amy. And thanks for taking on that chat question as well. So going back to Jenna, can you share a personal reflection on COVID-related communications during the last 6 months or so? Oh, you're on mute, Jenna.
Okay, that's probably better. I think you can hear me now. Everybody on campus going through this crisis together really brought people together. People left their silos, stopped talking about other people stepping on toes, and really came together to coordinate communication, because everybody really did consider that coordinated communication to be really critical to students and the community and families. We wanted to reduce chaos and increase comfort levels. So for the very first time, really, if you review a university website, you'll know that it's really hard to find information unless you already know the university, because everything is siloed. But for the very first time, all the communication on a particular topic was in one place. And hopefully we've learned from that so that we can replicate this in areas that aren't in a crisis. A personal reflection, in our emergency operations committee meeting, everybody would announce decisions before they were communicated out. And there were probably 30 different groups working on 30 different pieces of this COVID puzzle. So in the course of one meeting, there was an announcement that travel would be canceled. And of course, my red flags went up as I thought about the contracts I had out there, the students' hopes and dreams that you can't dash in just a travel is canceled message, and all of those kinds of things. So because we were all in this meeting together, it was really, really easy for me to quickly run across the room and talk to the person whose responsibility it was to send out that message and say, look, before this goes out, I've got to talk to you about what those implications will look like for us, for our contractual deadlines, and our financial position, for us as we prefer to defer or reschedule programs as opposed to use the word cancel. We had revenue that we needed to protect, and financial obligations that we needed to time out so that we could make claims. And we really just didn't want to take this opportunity away from students in the kind of message that would have otherwise go out. So we were able to ensure that the cancellation reflected just employee travel, and that gave us time to work through with our students, get their buy-in on the cancellations, and really reschedule the majority of those students.
Great, thank you. To you, Kemi. So based on your experience during spring 2020, how did fall 2020 look different?
Right. So, hi everyone again. I am from Illinois Tech here in Chicago. We are a school that is heavily STEM-based in our curriculum, and we also have a high percentage of graduate international students. I would say about 48% of our population of international students of our overall population are F1J1 students. So a little bit of background on that. I still remember the day in March 2020. We had a campus-wide faculty and staff meeting that we always do every semester. And at that point, I think as a city, as a nation, as a state, it was looking more and more that COVID was going to be more entrenched in our lives. And at that meeting, people were kind of sort of wondering, what we would do. Would we go, remote, hybrid? And I distinctly remember that leadership wasn't there yet. Let me put it like that, in terms of making such decisions or communicating that out to us so that we could plan for it. But I have to say that maybe a week or even less than 2 weeks from there, everything changed. We had to communicate to our students who were studying away, studying abroad, to come back, or rather we were advising them to come back based on the guidelines that we got from CDC, Department of State, and all those agencies as well. I think just like everyone possibly experienced, there was a lot of scrambling in terms of communication and decision making for spring 2020, right? Many of the upper leadership in any institution just didn't know the extent of what was coming. And I think we planned to the extent that we thought this thing might go, but not to the extent that we probably needed to. So in hindsight, for fall 2020, however, we were able to be more nimble. We were able to come together quickly. We were also, as a campus, able to include as many departments, as many people in the conversations earlier on for fall 2020. We also were able to make our plans as feasible as they needed to be for fall, for our campus, for our incoming students. And then we were able to spend, I want to say, the summer semester in the summer period to have some difficult conversations. What would happen if this continues for fall? How would that look for spring and all of that? For context sake, I would say that, oh my goodness, we had, off the top of my head, maybe between 10 and 15 different webinars for incoming students or family members or admitted students over the summer, right, to prepare for fall. We were also, like my colleagues have said, I think Jenna said earlier, we then had a central repository of information. So you had one website to go to as a parent, a family member, an incoming domestic student, an incoming international student. You had one place to go to that had all information about the upcoming fall semester. So if I had to compare and contrast, those were or are the differences about how we handle things as a campus, comparing spring 2020 to fall 2020. And I have to say that it did put us in a better place to be more ready for fall with all the things that has happened this fall 2020 semester already.
Great, thanks. And to continue on that, Kemi, so what are your changes, plans, and thoughts towards spring 2021? So building on what you just responded to.
Mm-hmm. I said this phrase yesterday, and I'm going to repeat it for the sake of this conversation. I think at this point, we're even beyond spring 2021, right? In terms of thinking and planning, where probably, at least for my department, I would say at fall 2021 and beyond. And the saying that I said yesterday was that we are hoping for the best, but we're planning for the worst. I know that sounds a little bit, I don't know, it sounds somehow, I get that, but I think that's one of the things that I have learned since COVID started, to really hope for the best, to hope for the better, but to plan for what ifs, the many what ifs that we weren't thinking about 7 months ago, 8 months ago, when the year started. So thinking about spring, thinking about fall, in my mind, for my department, for our institution, you kind of have to run your plans through what I call the COVID test, right? So what happens when numbers continue to increase in your county, in your state, in your city? Then you run it through the embassy and the government agency test of everything that has been going on this summer and this fall. And then in addition, you also start thinking ahead of, well, what if a policy were to come into place later this year that would really make it difficult or more difficult for students to get here on time or to be here when we want them to be. So one of the things that we have done as a campus, as an example, was just like a few other campuses that I know, we pushed our start date for spring into the future for about a week, right? We were supposed to start, I think, the 11th or so. So we're starting a week later. We eliminated spring break as well, just to give us as a campus and also our students a little bit of time to allow them, especially our international students, to be here a little bit later in January, as opposed to that 1 week as well. Yeah, and then again to fall, we're already at that point where we're thinking about fall 2021 in terms of our academic calendar, our policies, and even spring 2022, right? We're already thinking that far ahead of, well, what if this continues to be part of our lives for the next 1 year, 18 months? How do we make the work that we do survive the test of the next 12 months of the COVID test, like I said earlier? So those are kind of some of our plans and thoughts and hopes, if I can call it that, for spring and also for fall 2021 at our campus.
Perfect, thank you. So we're gonna move into a Q&A portion. I see Lacey already put a question out here. So panelists, I can read out these questions for you, and whoever really wants to take the question, or if a couple of you want to answer it, feel free to put your questions, everyone, in the general chat, and we'll read them out and we'll go from there. So Lacey's question: how are you communicating with internal leadership on the value of international teams, even when international student numbers are declining and study abroad programs are on hold? Very important question, I think, for everyone.
I can go first with that one if my colleagues don't mind. So our president at Illinois Tech is the co-chair of the President's Alliance for Higher Education. So it's actually easier for me. I don't have to communicate the importance of our international students to him or to his direct reports. They get it. He gets it. He was an international student himself in the US and is very outspoken about the value that international education and international students bring to Chicago, state of Illinois, the world, and the US as a whole. So that's one of the first thing I would say about that. And for study abroad or study away programs, I think this has allowed us to think deep about what is study away, what is study abroad, how can that be reimagined going forward. But yes, if we continue to look at the declining numbers, it is scary and it can be negative, but I'm lucky and fortunate to be at a campus where many of our senior leadership understand already. So we make decisions from that perspective. I don't have to do a lot of, well, this is what students bring to the table kind of a conversation. So that's.
So I think this is a great question. And speaking from the perspective of a large institution, there is a challenge, right? There's competing priorities right now. If I think about our president and our provost, oh, they have so much on their plates right now and so many things to worry about just in terms of keeping our campus running and our research operations running, keeping our medical system on track during a pandemic. And what our strategy has been is to try to just continually feed success stories about how we're pivoting during the pandemic, how we're rethinking international education in particular. So for international students, you know, we all suffered with the delays in visa processing. So we've been trying to push out information about the hosting program that we set up overseas, so that students from a particular country could still have a place to live and learn together, even if they weren't in Ann Arbor. So I've been quite deliberate, and I know that many of my UM colleagues have been the same way, you know, with their respective deans, is looking for those pockets of ways that we're continuing to engage our international students, how we're planning ahead, how we're moving into remote forms of intercultural learning. It's not easy. I will totally own that. But I think it doesn't have to be a huge strategic campaign for communications. It can be just chipping away with those smaller success stories.
And on the UW-Oshkosh campus, I've largely focused my communication on our enrollment manager. So I know that she's watching student numbers from all demographics, and that she's got her eye on the prize in terms of that magic number of total students she needs. So when I see news articles that I think might negatively affect our international student numbers, or if I hear news from around the University of Wisconsin system that international student numbers are moving in the right or in the wrong direction, I just continuously send her little FYIs just to keep it on her radar and to make sure that she's informed and knows what the true situation is sort of on the ground with those particular enrollment numbers. She was also an international student herself at one point in time, so she intrinsically understands the value of having those students on campus. So I don't have to make that case for her, which makes things a lot easier for me.
Great, thank you. Anyone else have any questions they want to put into the chat at all? We'll give it a second here. In the meantime, I do have another poll while everyone's kind of thinking of a question. So here's another poll here, focused on more fall 2020. Give it a few more seconds here. All right, so it looks like we have a question coming in, so let me end the poll and share the results here. Looks like most people say that it's kind of working, so that's good. I mean, the best we can do at this point is for it to kind of work and just keep evolving it from there. Rachel, do you want to send me that question, or do you want to share that question?
Yeah, I can share it. Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. So the question is, for those from smaller schools who have been operating as a 1 or 2 person office as the only communicator to all students and stakeholders, but without access to legal counsel, any recommendation or tools on how to navigate communication with these heavy burdens, especially in erratic federal guidance and travel environments?
We're a medium-sized school, but I think I can take this question. I think in this field, people outside of your institution would very likely be more than happy to collaborate or let you reuse information that other institutions are sending out. We regularly on our campus borrow language from the University of Wisconsin-Madison because they have a large legal team. They get their communications out very quickly because they have a lot of personnel, and we want to make sure that we're consistent. So we rely on some of the language that they include in their communications. We also reach out to other colleagues to find out what kinds of messaging they've sent out and whether or not we can simply borrow the language and resend, provided that works well for our student group as well. So anytime you can reach out or develop a small group of of colleagues who regularly share communication so that you're not all inventing the same wheel over and over again might be helpful.
Any, the other two want to add anything to that? Otherwise, we do have another question in here. Okay, great question. So our next one is, how do you drive students to actually read your communications? So the example, we use a newsletter application that allows us to see who opens and clicks, and there's a 30 to 45% open rate. You can communicate all we want, but it doesn't mean anything if students don't read it. So how do you get students to read these updates and communications from your office?
Nobody wants to touch that one. We want to stay on mute and just laugh out loud. That's the $1 million question, right? How do you get students to read? As the parent of 2 college students right now, it's a real challenge. I will say that what we've been trying to do, especially in the remote environment, this might sound like a really small suggestion, is to follow up on the emails, and we're trying to have as many conversations as we can. So keep the written communication shorter, give them the nuts and bolts and say, let's come together and talk about this, so that it becomes more of a Q&A, more of something, particularly with our international students, this has been useful. So we can push out information, but say, 8 p.m. your time, when you have a break, we'll be on the line and we'll be available to communicate. It's not a blanket solution, but I think if there's one thing we've learned is how convenient Zoom can be for reaching our students and our colleagues in other time zones. So that's my attempt to answer the question.
I can take a shot at this one as well. I do have 2 really good anecdotes to prove that we're not always good at what we do. So a number of years back, the Japanese government was giving away basically 23 free 2-week trips to UW-Oshkosh students. All they had to do was sign up. And I sent a message to 10,000 students, and we had trouble filling 23 spots because the other 9,000 whatever students deleted the message. And for a year afterwards, I would go into classrooms and say, you guys are all saying study abroad's too expensive. How many of you know that you turned down the opportunity to go to Japan for free for 2 weeks? And not one student would ever raise their hand. So that students, that it's not just a thought in my head that these students aren't reading their emails. A lot of them just don't. We've tried a couple of strategies. One is that our integrated, or our university marketing team creates email templates with a nice logo, and it looks very professional, and there's a specific font that goes along with it. So if it's really important, we try to use that template to convey a little gravity. And then we also will often lead our messages with something that looks a little bit like a threat. So on the study abroad side of things, for example, when a student submits their online study abroad application, the first thing they see is, your application is not complete. And then it says, dear student, here's why. Not that they all still read it. With the most recent messaging that we're sending out for our inbound students in response to this proposed rule by DHS ending duration of status, the message starts, the federal government is changing regulations. This might affect your ability to work. Okay, so a little bit of a threat, and then dear students. And that does seem to catch their attention. And even if they don't read the message, they might respond and say, what? What do I need to do? And then we'll know who we need to talk to.
I don't know if I have much to add to what Amy and Jenna have said. I know on our admission side, yes, it is a challenge to get our students to read communications. And I know that because then they call the International Center asking for information that was already disseminated to them. So it's a lot of saying, what's your name? What's your student ID number? Okay, this was communicated to you on this day. I think it's also a lot for us about perhaps calming students down first. and letting them know that what they need really was in front of them this whole time. We just started, or rather we will start using an in-house email communication system to students. So I hope to, get 35% of viewership of those emails. I think, although that sounds low, I'm looking forward to that because I don't have a way of knowing now who's clicking on what. But we do know that even the emails that we send out, there's a lot of, I didn't get that. What does that say? And then just pointing them back to what we said. One thing that I'm kind of seeing that's helping to kind of wrap up my thoughts is social media, right? So we've started engaging that a little bit more for Study Away, heavily for Study Away, but also for our ISSS efforts. So that then redirects students to our website where the information is, and then they're like, oh, okay, it's there. But that's the golden question of the century to the person that asked that question. If and when you are able to figure out a solution, please share with us so that we can implement it all around as well.
Thank you, all of you. We have another question, but before I ask it, I know there was just a little bit of talk here in the chat about people from one-person offices and support. Just wanted to let all of you know, if you're not already aware, that NAFSA does have a one-person office MIG, member interest group. They are not, unfortunately, having a meeting during our conference, but you can join their group through NAFSA Network, and you can join that if you're not a member as well. So just information for those people. All right, the question that I have is, what is a good surprise or change that has resulted of from these quickly changing times?
I can take that one. Oh, go ahead, Kemi.
No, I was going to say, could you repeat that, Rachel?
Yeah, of course. What is a good surprise or change that has resulted from these quickly changing times?
I can say on the UW-Oshkosh campus that that probably the best thing to come from this is it really solidified risk management as a central tenet of what we do as an institution. And it also really worked towards establishing the unit that has responsibility for that on our campus as recognized experts in the field. I think before this, risk management was seen as an annoyance, a hindrance to academic pursuits. But with the visibility of that particular team, and especially the leadership in that team on our campus, I think that a lot of people have really grown in their appreciation for risk management as a thing, and risk managers as people who really care about the campus and the students, and who will do everything they can possibly to manage risks while ensuring that academics are as strong as they ever were.
I see two, I felt two very quick answers to this question. The first is, I have never seen the willingness to harmonize decisions and approaches across our campus like I have now as a result of the pandemic. Our international education community, they're already wonderful, right? I mean, they're friendly, we know we've self-selected into this group, but more than ever, I see our offices and our colleagues coming together and being dedicated to, we should all do this the same way. We should really coordinate our messaging and how we're taking care of our students. So I see that as a real, there's nothing like going through, all of us want to block last spring from our memory. And I think going through that hardship together has brought us closer. And I lost my train of thought on the second one. So I'll chime back in if Kemi wants to add something.
Oh, I kept muting myself. So I will say that as a campus, as a professional, as a manager of a team, I think not that we completely lost focus on who our constituents are or were, but we were able to quickly or somehow quickly remember that the focus should have always been on our students, right? We realized over the summer that there were things just being thrown at them, decisions that are being made by government agencies that were just making them be in a position of disadvantage. And it made us as a campus, us as educators, rise up to say, you know what, our focus will be on these students. Our focus will be on assisting them. Our focus would be on making sure that despite and in spite of everything that's going on, we can still be a positive light to them. So what does that mean, right? A student comes in and normally maybe we wouldn't expedite something or we wouldn't make an exception for something, but we find ourselves now thinking along that way, right? We're not doing anything we shouldn't be doing or anything illegal, but we're just refocusing ourselves back to our students, seeing them less as customers and seeing them more as students that they are, and how they enrich our lives on our campus. So that was one nice surprise that I have seen and shift since the past, 6 months since this started.
The quick second thing I was going to add is I think that when we think about student programs, now that we've learned how to have backup plans for remote instruction, for virtual connections, I think we're in a better position moving forward if we need to pivot, right? Whether it's a pandemic or some other kind of event. I think more than ever, we're able to ensure that students can complete their experience, and if we have to suspend or change.
Perfect, thank you. So we had a couple questions come in over this, so I want to take some of these and then we can wrap up. We have about 10 minutes left of the session here. So the first question that came in over the public chat, I have to scroll just a little bit here. This is more for international students specifically. Inbound undergrad students are not really communicating that much versus graduate students, specifically China, Vietnamese students. Any recommendation to reaching out to those kind of students in particular is that question. Any ideas on?
I don't have very good recommendations on that. Just want to say that we have the same challenges with students, especially from China, for example, Korea not responding. Again, it's maybe not the best strategy, but as an example, a professor reached out to me to let me know that one of our students in Korea had only finished the first question on a test, and she figured something went wrong, right? The rest of the test was completely unanswered. She had been trying to reach him for 2 weeks to give him an opportunity to retake the test, and he had not responded. So I emailed him and said, hey, your luggage is in my office. I'm thinking that you're not coming back. Should I keep it? And heard back from him within 20 seconds. And had the opportunity then to redirect the conversation and say, you need to call or contact your faculty member. So we've done that a number of times in the past with other students too, where we've got a non-responder out there and we'll pivot the question to something that we believe is important to them. Use that to establish the communication and then lead into the next question, because now they know that we've got their attention.
Yeah,
Sorry, Gemma.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say, anyone can look in the chat as well. Some people are also putting some good suggestions in the chat box too, if you're looking at that while you're listening. Go ahead, Kemi.
Yeah, just like someone just posted now, we do have partner offices in China and India. So if that were, to happen, we would reach out to those offices who would then do more of a local touch point with the student to get them to respond. So that has been our lifesaver, if I can say that on our campus. We have that ability to do that.
Great, thank you for that. Let's move on to the next question so we can fit these last two in here before we end. So the question is, on a small campus, how can we help to get international students to have more of a stake from the major departments on campus within the total student population? So another international student focused question there.
That's a tough one. I know we at UW-Oshkosh, I won't say that we would be a best practice institution by any means in getting individual departments to see the value of international students. But we do have what we call international student advocates, and it's not an active role on our campus, but anytime we have an individual professor or staff member who reaches out to us with questions or concerns about an international student, we add them to what I call our advocate list. And then that person becomes someone that we're constantly pushing out messaging on in terms of international opportunities. And we've got visitors coming to campus from such and such a partner overseas. Would you like to join us, for a reception? Or we've got new international students coming in, and this is the number of students who will be here and what countries they're from. And so as soon as we get outreach from them, we start adding them to, basically it's email messages that we push out, because our professors and instructional academic staff and our staff on campus are not likely to follow us on Facebook or Twitter or any of those things. And it seems to be a good way for us to elicit questions back from them about international students that they might be trying to support, or what could I do to be more involved. They'll see that message from us, and the message itself may not be important to them, but the fact that they got a random contact from us sort of triggers a question that maybe they've had in their mind for a while, and it gives them an opportunity to just easily answer back.
Great. So we just have a couple minutes left. So I am going to mention our last question from the chat. It is another relatively specific one. If anyone wants to touch on it, but then I do want to move to our final wrap-up question to all panelists. So the chat question: how do you plan for spring 2021 inbound F1 students from abroad based on SEVP regulations and changing COVID numbers, and the possibility of institutions going entirely online virtual due to local state guidance? So again, relatively specific, if anyone wants to touch on that or give a resource, otherwise we'll move into that final question.
I can just quickly give you an overview of what our position has been at Oshkosh. Basically, what we're attempting to do with students is to give them the information that we have and let them know that we're going to be flexible in terms of the dates that they show up on our campus. So if they want to show up in the middle of fall and move from online courses to in-person courses, because that's when when embassies open, or that's when flights are suddenly available, we're going to accommodate that. And in the meantime, we're going to continuously let students know what the implications are for delaying travel, or the opportunities might be for actually traveling to the United States from specific places, so that students can take advantage of any sort of window of opportunity that's there. But we're not going to tell them that they have to come. We're not going to tell them that they have to leave if they're already here. And we're just going to keep them apprised of government regulations and changes as they come along, so that they can make the best decisions for themselves.
And to add to that, for our campus, we are telling students now that, yes, this is what the regulation says for continuing students and for incoming students, and to let them know that as of now, you as a continuing student, you can be 100% online, but as a new student, more than likely you would have to, these are the criterias. And again, just echoing that again and again, that these regulations can change, and if and when they do, we will let you know as soon as we find out. We have found that just given as much as we can, especially from our admission side, helps, and having them communicate to us about when they're coming in, if they're coming in late, when they get their visas, it helps us to know when they're coming, who is coming, and what plans we can make for them in this ever-changing landscape that we have all found ourselves in.
Great, thank you. So we are going to wrap up here. We do have one final question. If any of our panelists do you want to take a few seconds just to respond to it? So it's what will the COVID-19 experience, or sorry, how will the COVID-19 experience permanently change the way you communicate moving forward? If anyone wants to touch on that.
So I think on our campus, we've really seen a paradigm shift, right? Just this fundamental change in our assumptions about education abroad, for example. And moving forward, we're going to be continually communicating about contingency plans for program administrators and for our students, right? The language will change in terms of the way we advise, the types of materials that we provide to our students, the program timelines. In the good old days, we used to say, oh, there could be an unanticipated event or in case of emergency. And I think moving forward, it's going to be program changes are possible. They are real possibilities. We are going to have alternative plans in those situations. So I think we're going to be much more prepared for uncertainties and program interruptions.
I will answer that also from the way we think and plan, not only the way we communicate going forward. It's to have options. So when you're making plans, you give it yourself as a planner or a department options. Option A, and then option B, and then option C. That way, if and when, more likely when, less if, things happen, things get worse from where they are, you have several options that you can reach into and pull out of your bag and implement, as opposed to in the past or right before COVID started, you just have one plan as a campus, you implement it, it has always worked. Nothing really went wrong significantly, and you relied on that. But moving forward, one of the things that this has taught me and us is you have to have options. You have to have all the what ifs sorted out, and you plan that way.
So I'm just going to share one last slide here for everyone. All right, so just a quick thank you. A reminder, this session will be is being recorded, will be available on YouTube. There is an IEL roundtable tomorrow, beginning at 10:30 Central, 11:30 Eastern. So if you do want to participate more in this conversation, more of a roundtable format, we do have that available for you tomorrow morning. And then there will be a session or a conference evaluation sent out at some point that you can follow as well. So just letting you know that those things are coming up, and thank you so much for joining this session. Thank you to all of our presenters for answering all these great questions. Thank you everyone for submitting questions and submitting all of the advice and information in the chat box as well. If any presenters want any last things to say, otherwise, thank you all so much for joining us this morning.
Just thank you for all the great questions and for your patience with this virtual